over the anatomy, neuroanatomy pathways for our auditory system, our vestibular system, as well as touch on taste. So, you have a new pathways handout that you've already seen, fast and slow somatosensory for the body and the head. And now we've added on the pathways for the auditory system, the vestibular system, as well, excuse me, as well as taste. And you'll note there's not very much here for the vestibular system. Vestibular information does make it to cortex for conscious awareness, but it's not a very distinct sense, as well as it goes through some not terribly easy to find structures. So we're not going to follow it all the way to cortex. You should know it does get there, but all we're going to do is follow it coming in and making its first synapses in the vestibular nuclei. And that's all we will show for vestibular system. Okay, so once again, I'm going to shrink this up so that I can use the board. And let's look at our structures. So when we bring up a new section, the first question is always, where are we? Once again, use your landmarks. So here we have our pyramids as well as our inferior olives. So that tells you you're at what level, main level of the brain stem, the medulla. And we need to know if we're inferior or superior medulla. Pause if you need to. We have a wide open fourth ventricle, therefore we're in superior regions of the medulla. So we're going to be looking right in this area. And I am going to leave it to you to review the inferior cerebellar peduncle, as well as the medial lemniscus, the anterolateral system, and the descending or spinal nucleus tractus 5, as well as VTT. Be sure you practice those. I'm just going to point out some new structures that we have on this slide that I haven't pointed out previously. So, a new structure that we have right here are a couple of the vestibular nuclei. There's 4 different vestibular nuclei. You just need to be able to identify them as vestibular nuclei. We are not going to worry about inferior, superior, medial, and lateral. So I will color code everything vestibular in purple. So this is structure number 7, and we have a primary afferent out in the periphery, so its cell body is going to be in what? In a ganglion, indeed, and this is going to be associated with the 8th cranial nerve. So this would be in the vestibular ganglion of the 8th cranial nerve. And that afferent is going to come in and make its first synapse right here. Now, a higher order neuron is the prethalamic relay nucleus for the vestibular system. A higher order neuron would project to thalamus. It does, but we're not going to follow it, so I'm not going to bother to draw it in there. This lateral vestibular nucleus has a really distinct appearance. It sort of looks like salt and pepper. People often refer to it that way. That's just to help you find it. I won't ask you a particular name for a vestibular nucleus. Okay, so that is our vestibular system and the structure that you need to find. There are 4 different nuclei, but we're just going to call them vestibular nuclei. And these are primary sensory afferents coming in to make their first synapse. So is this information coming from the ipsilateral side or the contralateral vestibular apparatus? Ipsilateral, primary sensory afferents do not cross the midline for the purposes of this course. Okay, what else do we have on here that's new? And the answer to that is, oops, it's not to do with the vestibular system. This one has to do with taste. And the structure that we have here is the solitary nucleus, which surrounds the solitary tract. And people sometimes refer to this as the donut nucleus. And that's kind of handy because it's handling taste information as well as some general visceral afferents. Those are divided in the different regions of the solitary nucleus or tract, but we're not going to go to that level of detail. So this is taste information as well as general visceral information, which we'll learn about in future lectures. And again, we're going to have a primary afferent with its cell body in a ganglion that's going to come in here and run in the tract, and then it's going to make, this isn't going to show very well, maybe if I make the line smaller, that's going to come and make a synapse on a higher order neuron within the solitary nucleus. And then that higher order neuron is going to send its axons towards VPM of the thalamus. So we're in the medulla, we're looking at this portion of our pathways right here. Here's the solitary nucleus with its primary afferent, cell bodies in ganglia, making its first synapse. And this is kind of unique. It stays ipsilateral all the way to cortex. So this one is not crossing the midline. The nucleus is the solitary nucleus and tract. And this one stays ipsilateral. All right. And also, like I said, be sure you review all of these other marked structures. They are fair game for marking on a test. And be sure you can answer the 4 questions for your nuclei and your tracts for each of those structures. All right, we're going to go superiorly to the next section. Oh, and I have the atlas section labeled here. This is from the new atlas. This is from the older atlases, in case you manage to find one online, because they're a lot cheaper. And the first question we always ask, where are we? Well, we still have these 2 landmark structures. Pause if you need to. The pyramids and the inferior olives. Therefore, we're at what level? Pause if you need to. We're in the medulla. And are we in inferior medulla or superior medulla? Pause if you need to. 4th ventricle is wide open, so we're still in the superior regions of the medulla, but we've nudged ourselves up just a little bit so that we can see a new structure here. Okay, but let's go ahead and go through all of the structures that we need to be able to find in the superior regions of the medulla. So we need to be able to find our medial lemniscus for fast somatosensory. We need to be able to find our anterolateral system for slow somatosensory, both from the body. We need to be able to find our descending nucleus and tract of the trigeminal system for slow somatosensory information from the head, as well as VTT is going to be going through here. A new one that we'll find for the auditory system is the cochlear nuclei. So this is going to be the first prethalamic relay nucleus in the auditory system. There are a bunch of prethalamic relays in the auditory system. And we'll find our vestibular nuclei again, as well as our solitary nucleus and tract for taste. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning and find our medial lemniscus, and that is located right where it has been all the way through the medulla. Headless homunculus, standing on the pyramids. So that is our medial lemniscus. Is this information, the fast somatosensory information in the medial lemniscus, does it originate in the ipsilateral body or the contralateral body? Pause if you need to. The contralateral body is where it's coming from. What about our slow somatosensory information? That also has to get through this section, and that's found in the anterolateral system. It hasn't moved from where we showed it before. So, anterolateral system, slow somatosensory information coming from the ipsilateral body or the contralateral body. Pause if you need to. Contralateral. Okay, we are in superior regions of the medulla. Do we have any fast somatosensory information for the head going through this section? Pause if you need to. Refer to your diagram. Is there any fast somatosensory? No. But is there any slow somatosensory for the head shown in, that shows up in the superior regions of the medulla? Yes. So we need to find that information. That's going to be the descending nucleus and tract of the trigeminal. And those higher order neurons are going to send their axons across the midline to ascend in VTT. All right, so at this level, we don't have 5A, but we do have 5B, and we have the descending nucleus and tract of the trigeminal system, as well as VTT. And as we know, we have primary sensory afferents making their first synapse here. Primary sensory afferents do not cross the midline. Therefore, the nucleus and tract, this prethalamic relay nucleus, is going to be, the information is coming from the ipsilateral side of the head, coming right in here, and then it's crossing. So VTT, that information is now coming from the contralateral side of the head. This should all be review. Okay, we also have, we also have our inferior cerebellar peduncle, which of course has our proprioceptive information coming in either for the lower body or the upper body. And this is heading to the ipsilateral cerebellum. And that is going through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Again, nothing to do with conscious awareness. Alrighty then. So what are our new structures? Well, the one we met just in the previous section is going to be our vestibular nuclei. Nothing has changed here. Vestibular nuclei with information coming from the ipsilateral vestibular apparatus. And then a brand new structure here is our, that's not as big as I want. There we go. This one is our cochlear nuclei, and that's going to be dealing with auditory information. And that is located right here, sort of wrapping around the outside of the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and it shows very nicely on the left side here at this level. It's just kind of starting up here on the other side. Okay, so what do we have going on here? We have primary sensory afferents with their cell bodies in a ganglion. For the auditory system, you'll find out that's going to be the spiral ganglion, and that is associated with the 8th cranial nerve. And that primary sensory afferent is going to come in and make its first synapse right here in the cochlear nuclear complex. There's a couple of different nuclei here too, and we won't worry about the individual ones. And then, excuse me, then these higher order neurons are going to do something different than, excuse me, they're going to do something different than what we saw in the other systems. Some of this information is going to go ipsilateral, and some of this information is going to go contralateral. And that you can see on your pathways diagram here. So we're at the cochlear nuclei, and this is the first prethalamic nucleus. And then it's going to make a bunch of synapses along the way in the pons that we're not going to identify in lab. However, you will learn about them for the names of some of these nuclei in the lecture, but you won't have to find them. And then that information eventually, once we get up into the midbrain, is going to go to still another prethalamic, because we're not up to thalamus yet, we're still in the brainstem, another prethalamic relay nucleus called the inferior colliculus. And some of these neurons located right here in the cochlear nucleus are going to send their axons all the way to the inferior colliculus on the ipsilateral side. And some of them are going to send their axons all the way to the inferior colliculus on the contralateral side. And so this system has different laterality depending on the structure that you're talking about. But right here for the nucleus that we can see right here is the cochlear nucleus. And this is the first of the prethalamic relay nuclei. So we have a primary sensory afferent making its synapse, first synapse right here. So is this information coming from the ipsilateral ear, the contralateral ear, or both ears? Pause if you need to. Ipsilateral. So for this first, where the primary sensory afferents are making their first synapse, that's going to be ipsilateral. That information is coming in from the ipsilateral ear. But as you can see on the diagram, immediately after the cochlear nucleus, it's going to go bilaterally, both ipsilateral and contralateral projections. So as you get superior to the cochlear nucleus, the information is going to be coming from both ears. Only for the cochlear nucleus itself, in terms of our prethalamic relay nuclei, is the information coming from only one ear, and that's going to have functional consequences. Okay, so that concludes our first segment of this auditory and vestibular lecture. Please use the handout with the pathways as well as the posted information that we just went over and review the structures on sections, on the 614 and 613. And once you can draw these things out, practice drawing them out, review it right now. Once you're happy and can answer the 4 questions for each nucleus and each tract, go ahead and start the next segment of the auditory vestibular lecture.